Polar Coordinate System. Learning objectives. At the end of this lesson, the learners will be able to understand the polar coordinate system and to plot points using polar coordinates. Polar coordinate. Polar coordinates are points labeled r and theta and plotted on a polar grid. The polar grid is represented as a series of concentric circles radiating out from the pole or the origin of the coordinate plane. Polar coordinate system is a two-dimensional coordinate system in which each point on a plane is determined by distance from a reference point and an angle from a reference direction. Radius or radical coordinate is a distance measured from the pole and denoted by r. Pole angle, also called angular coordinate or azimuth, an angle measured from the polar axis and is usually counterclockwise, denoted by theta. Pole is the reference point of a polar graph. Polar axis is away from the pole in the reference direction. So we have in a figure 1, this is the radius. Pole is the pole. This is the polar angle and polar axis. Polar angle theta is considered positive if measured in a counterclockwise direction from a polar axis. Polar angle theta is considered negative if measured in a clockwise direction from the polar axis. If the radian distance r is positive, then the point P is r units from O along the terminal side of theta. If the radial distance r is negative, then the point P is r units from O along the ray in the opposite direction as the terminal side theta. If the radius r is 0, then the point P is the point O. This is the polar graph. So we have in figure 3 a polar grid with angles labeled in degrees. So polar 3 labeled in degrees, and in a figure 4 a polar grid with angles labeled in radians. This is the degree, and in the figure 3 is a degree, and in figure 4 is the radian. Plotting points using polar coordinates. Figure 4. The polar grid is scaled as the unit circle with the positive x-axis, now viewed as the polar axis and the origin as the pole. Locate the polar angle theta on the polar coordinate planes. Determine where the radius intersect the angle. Starting from the pole, you move r distance in the direction of angle.